Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever or whenever you're joining us today for what I'm sure will be a fascinating foray into what can only be described as a complex and topical area, among other things. Now, my name is Kieran. I'm the head of content for regulatory compliance at LexisNexis. Regulatory compliance is a legal obligations register and alerting solution that combines regulatory content with technology to empower organizations to take control of their compliance obligations. We offer curated content across various jurisdictions and at the global level, presenting you with a clear path to compliance. Within our broad module portfolio, we offer a global ESG module, drawing together various international frameworks to present best practice for sequencing reporting frameworks. Now, a lot of three-letter acronyms are tossed around in the realms of GRC and CSR, and there's a few more. But ESG might be the most prominent right now by virtue of the breadth of factors and indices that it addresses, and the significant increase in expectations placed upon organizations by the community, by investors, and by each other to contribute to forging a just and sustainable and communitarian society. It's impacted how companies do business, how they interact with other organizations and the community, and how they're structured. But how can we measure those impacts? How can organizations forecast and mitigate their ESG risks? And what do trends at the local and regional and global level tell us about the future of ESG in the years ahead? Now, these are all very broad questions that we will start to tease out today. And I'm joined by three eminent subject matter experts to share their unique insights on this complex area. First, we have Angus Chan, Vice President, Head of ESG Solutions for Greater China of Alliance Advisors. Angus is an experienced ESG specialist with over 8 years of experience in ESG advisory and reporting, target setting, and various environmental projects. Prior to joining Alliance, Angus has worked as a key team member in a blue chip real estate company in Hong Kong. Angus has led a number of ESG projects covering ESG reporting and advisory, strategy formulation, third-party ESG ratings, carbon reduction target setting, decarbonisation strategy, advisory on climate change, and supply chain and investors engagement. Next, we have Patricia Slowinska, who is the head of ESG with Andrews Partnership. Patricia is an experienced ESG specialist with over 10 years of experience in ESG advisory, advocacy, and various environmental projects. Prior to joining Andrews Partnership, Patricia has worked as an executive at a multinational corporate in real estate across the Asia Pacific and is running a social entrepreneurship community in Hong Kong. Patricia has led various SDG-related projects covering strategy formulation and implementation, advisory on smart city and energy renewable solutions, and the engagement of diverse relevant stakeholders. We also have Sam Crispin, who is head of ESG and sustainability at Savills APAC. Sam is responsible for internal ESG reporting for Savills operations in Asia Pacific, as well as building a regional sustainability advisory services team working for building owners and occupiers. This blended role includes setting and implementing net zero pathways, science-based targets initiative, TCFD reporting, energy transition, as well as organization and asset level sustainability strategy, certifications, net zero workplaces, and sustainability data analytics and reporting. Now, before we get underway into the meat of the discussion, just a few short housekeeping points that you will have seen coming up in the chat if you've been following along. The upcoming discussion will run for approximately 45 minutes, after which there will be just under 10 minutes to answer questions from the virtual floor. Now, we are covering a lot of ground today, so if you do have any follow-up questions for one or more of our speakers or have queries about another aspect of ESG that we don't cover, please submit it using the chat function to send a message to the panelists. And if we don't get to your question today, we will endeavour to collate responses and send these through after the session. But with that out of the way, let's get into the meat of the discussion. So Angus, I might start with you, and let's start with a broader introductory question here. What exactly is ESG? And from your experience, what are some of the emerging topics that are arising in relation to ESG?
Yes, thanks, Kieran. First of all, thanks the invitations from LexisNexis for me to join in this webinar. So for ESG, environmental, social, and governance, it is an expanding universe. Yeah, I should use this word, the universe, because it covering a wide range of topics, including climate change, carbon emissions, water security, human capital, biodiversity, wellness, supply chain, corporate governance, impacts to society, and so on. And for climate emissions, it further covers the scope 1, 2, 3, and more attentions are focusing on the carbon emissions. And for example, like the scope 3 emissions, it covers the emissions from upstream and downstream value chains, covering the purchased goods and service from the company's suppliers, capital goods, embodied carbons, tenant emissions, and so on. And according to the greenhouse gas protocol, the GHG protocol, there are 15 categories under scope 3. And at the same time, as I mentioned, that the ESG universe is expanding and evolving. There are some emerging topics, and I can say there's 4 of them. The first one is about the board diversity. So it should be related to the percentage of the human directors, whether it is over 30% or not. And meanwhile, we have engaged and discussed with some investors. And based on their policy policies, it even showed that there's expectations that there are female directors should be over 30% or even more. And the second emerging topic should be the net zero. I guess many people will hear this word, whatever the net zero or carbon neutrality. So for the net zero, it's about the greenhouse gas emissions of the organizations are reduced and the residual emissions are permanently neutralized. In fact, the concept of the net zero is more stringent than carbon neutrality. Yeah, just a quick information for this. And seven is about the natural capital. So our natural capital encompasses the supply of the world's natural resources from which economic value and benefits can be derived, such as forests, oceans, and fresh water, and biodiversity as well. And we see that some of the very large asset managers post their engagement topics. And one of these, apart from the climate change, is natural capital. And we see this in this 1 or 2 years. And the last one is about the human capital management. It describes how an organization recruits and engages people, including corporate culture, talent management, diversity, and wellness. For the corporate cultures, it covers the behaviors, shared values, and beliefs of organizations and its employees. And for the talent management, one of the interesting points is that many companies will disclose their turnover rates. And we see that there's a trend that more and more companies will disclose the voluntary turnover rates rather than just the turnover rates. And the last one is about the wellness. And of course, during the COVID, more and more people are concerned the physical wellness. But apart from the physical wellness, we see that mental wellness is also one of the emerging topics. So yeah, thanks so much.
It's such a broad area, and really taking it from all the way from that broad set of environmental metrics through to when you start to look at the metrics around the social and the governance in terms of those different components. And really, from in the research that I've done over ESG, particularly in the last couple of months, it really is limitless, the kinds of things that you can measure in that. But if we look at specifically at the ESG impacts on business and society, the S and the G, perhaps more so in that acronym. And Patricia, I might hand to you on this. From your experience, how does ESG impact on business and society, and how has it been reshaping organizations and their leadership structures?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you so much for having me today as well. Welcome, everyone. Just a small thing that I wanted to adjust is that my previous experience has been in a retail, in the retail industry, not in the real estate, just in case I'm gonna receive any questions, just making sure that this is the right information. In terms of, to your question, it's indeed a very broad subject. I mean, it has a huge impact. People are talking about it becoming a buzzword. One thing that struck me as well, what Angus said, is how they actually impact all the different components. And we can say as well that ESG is really a framework for conscious consumerism. And it helps basically businesses attract investors, build customer loyalty, improve the financial performance, and make business operations actually more sustainable. But the interesting part from my expertise working as an executive ESG consultant for a boutique search firm, what we see when we speak with C-suite business leaders and with board members, with those actually decision makers, we can see how the ESG impact has shifted actually and reshaped indeed the organizations and their leadership style. And this is basically affecting more often the different categories, obviously, but you can see it reflects a company philosophy, strategy, and approach. And there are three things where it really affects. One is it's compliance driven. The other one is social responsibility driven, and the other one is strategy driven. And this is where it's always becomes so difficult as well in having one certain definition to ESG, because for every company and every industry, it will have a different lens that you will have to look through. So when it is compliance driven, ESG actions, they are primarily focused on satisfying the compliance requirements. Regulators, exchange rules, something that Angus mentioned as well right now, when in January 2023, everyone will be obliged as well already with the reporting parts on the GRI. So you can see that there are a lot of changes coming in and a lot of accountability as well. So these leaders focus then on managing and reporting on specific elements such as climate, diversity, equity, inclusion, safety, well-being. I mean, everything that Angus already has mentioned, or governance protocols even. The social responsibility driven ESG actions, they are based more on values and company purpose. And that has a huge impact on the employees, on the people, on the end customers as well. So they want to have an alignment with multiple stakeholders. So it's all about collaboration. And it's all about actually as well that the social responsibility driven leaders generally believe that a healthy planet, robust markets with loyal customers, and engaged productive employees are good for business, because they will grow your business, they will move it forward. And it's good for the next generations, obviously, as well. Well, as strategy-driven ESG actions, they are more integrated into the company's strategy and operations in sectors where ESG drives specific and quantified business opportunities. So leaders create well-defined and measured links between the ESG and business performance, risk management, value creation. So there is a huge emphasis on the connection between the ESG and business opportunity. So for example, an oil and gas company that adopts renewable energy. And here's an amazing example of BP, for instance, that started actually a collaboration with the Chinese Didi company. And they have actually formed a company called Xiaozhu. And Xiaozhu is basically placing all the rechargeable parts for the EV vehicles in China, which is amazing. Or it has a different example is consumer packaged goods company that offers a line of sustainable food products. Or, for instance, a financial service company that offers ESG investment funds. So it really puts the people to a more, and the business leaders to a more outside of the box thinking, where we actually see solutions, potentials for a better planet and for a better community. Thank you.
And it's a fantastic point, particularly around the types of people you have to consider as your stakeholders in really understanding what the ESG strategy is. And I think that concept of collaboration, one of the concepts that is really tied into collaboration is that the concept of inter-organizational environmental governance. And Sam, maybe you can answer this. What exactly is inter-organizational environmental governance? And can you provide an example of that kind of collaboration in practice?
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Yeah, I just want to add on to where Patricia was going with her comments. She mentioned leadership and collaboration. So the inter-organization environmental governance really means businesses coming together to help each other to meet their sustainability goals. And this is something we're seeing increasing in importance as we move on from scope 1 and scope 2, which many businesses now have a firm grip on. That is their own direct and indirect emissions. Scope 3 really covers their supply chain. So it means looking at everything upstream and downstream that the business does in terms of procurement and working with their suppliers in order to encourage suppliers who may be a little bit slow to get on board the sustainability journey, to encourage them to take action, maybe decarbonize their production process, for example. In my industry, in the real estate industry, we have a tradition where the landlord and tenant come to an agreement for 3, 5, sometimes 25 years in the UK. And that then becomes a fairly arm's length transaction, and they don't necessarily talk to each other very much in the intervening period until it comes up to renewal or unless there's a problem. So what we are advocating for is a move towards what we call green leases. This is a collaborative framework between organizations, landlord and tenant. They work together to reduce their energy consumption, often in the building, managing waste, reducing air conditioning out of hours, and that is the collaborative framework. At the moment, it's probably not common to see it in a legally binding contract. It's more of a voluntary environmental partnership where they come to agree to work and collaborate on all of those measures. So, for example, when at the end of a lease term, it's often the case where a tenant has to reinstate the original handover condition, which would be a bare shell. They have to rip out all the renovation that's been done, excluding the landlord's provisions. If they've made any improvements to the lighting, for example, they may have replaced fluorescent lighting with LED lighting. They then have to take out the LED lighting and reinstate the old inefficient fluorescent lighting before they hand back to the landlord. If you have a collaborative framework, you can come to an agreement where you don't have to do that. You don't have to generate all that waste. So that's one example. And that is an increasing trend in the real estate industry.
And that's a positive, I think that's more of a positive instance of the use of the word green. So green leasing is positive, but then we have at least in where I'm in Australia, we have green being used in a more pejorative way, which is greenwashing, and the way that companies, well, in a deceptive way, present themselves as being environmentally friendly or being sustainable. And Angus, I might pass back to you to talk a bit more.
Sorry, Kieran. I think that there was actually a very interesting occasion right now from the ACCC in Australia finding actually one of the companies for greenwashing. So it's very relevant absolutely. What you're saying.
It is. No, and thank you for pointing it out. It's really relevant to really draw it back to the empirical examples, because this is happening, and it's not just us talking about these concepts. There is activity going on in a regulatory environment to really crack down on these aspects. So it is real. And in that sense, Angus, maybe you can talk about that aspect of crackdown. As regulators do crack down on greenwashing, what can be the key takeaways for organizations of this kind of crackdown on greenwashing, and what can they do to, I guess, mitigate against the risk of being presented as green in a greenwashing way?
Yeah, definitely, friends. It is really another emerging topics, and yes, as friends Patricia as her comment. Yeah, so I can see that the governments and regulators in different industries are proposing relevant regulations, and some of them even have promulgated regulations for clear definitions and applications as well. And in US, from the Securities and Exchange Commissions, SEC, we can see that the SEC has launched the Climate and ESG Task Force to identify potential violations, including material gaps or misstatements in issuers' disclosure of climate risk under existing rules, and disclosure and compliance issues relating to the investment advisors and funds ESG strategies. It's more on the investment side. And we have seen that about the number of enforcement cases. Last year, there were 2 cases. And right now in 2022, already 5 already. And some of the very large asset manager and management firm have been fined. Yeah. And for EU, and there's the EU taxonomy is not something new. And anyway, it defines 6 environmental objectives, and the economic activity satisfies the requirements of do no significant harm, BNSH, to any of the environmental objectives. And also from UK, we see that from the Financial Conduct Authority, it is proposing new measures to define how to use the terms ESG, green, sustainable for investment products. Measures consist of detailed disclosures suitable for both the institutional investors as well as the retail investors, and also covering the consumer-facing disclosures to help consumers to understand the key sustainability-related features of an investment product. Okay, so back to the basic. You see, so different regulation or else. How to substantiate the green or sustainable features? So we can go to the detail instead. What sort of standards is based on? Maybe based on some ISO standard or international regulations or standards. And more importantly, whether an ESG quality review has been conducted. And what's the assumptions, uncertainty, and limitations? And when we talk about this, because especially from the environmental viewpoint, we take the life cycle assessment. That means from the product, like the beginning, using, and ending. So we can see that there's some future elements. So what sort of exactly the uncertainty and limitations? At least the company needs to clearly know, so that at least they don't exaggerate on this. And also for some procedural issue is that whether the company has laid out or establish relevant policy and procedures for the environmental features. And I even see that a very small number of firms has published the greenwashing policy as well. Anyway, it's some hints, yeah, I can share. Thank you.
That's interesting to hear they really are starting to put in actual greenwashing policies. That is a very interesting observation. It's fascinating to see like how that kind of momentum is shifting, and as we see regulators, starting to crack down on greenwashing, how that response is being taken from the business side. And I guess to the point about having a policy and having a publicly available policy demonstrates that level of accountability. You want to be accountable for your actions and to demonstrate that you are taking steps to prevent against certain things. I might, Patricia, maybe you can jump in on this in terms of the accountability point and that linkage between accountability and collaboration, and what that kind of impact these concepts have on how organizations approach their reporting and disclosure. Obviously, there is a very broad spectrum of different reporting standards, but how are those concepts and that linkage boosting collaboration, but then also how they report?
Yes, that's a very good question. And obviously as well, what's Angus and Sam already have mentioned, I mean, currently there are so many procedures and so many frameworks as well. We can see as well Europe being actually basically the pioneer in it. And however, we have to be careful as well that we don't go too much into the wider spectrum, that we don't have too many organs that will be actually starting all the accountability or the reporting parts, because we're gonna get lost. I mean, everyone gets lost then. So it's quite important to have some foundation in place. I mean, one side note is obviously as well the irony of the main sponsor of COP27, not to mention right now all the names, but obviously that was actually something quite interesting. I think it was good for the branding, but we will get to this part. And this is probably why I should actually stop talking about it. But coming back to the accountability part. So I always believe, and this is something that's actually Angus has mentioned as well, where he touched base on the scope 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, a lot of companies are already approaching and executing on the scope 1 and 2, and they have internally, they have actually all the control on it. However, scope 3 is very often said that it's out of the control of the company. However, I do believe that accountability boosts collaboration, and that's always my ABC to the scope 3. Because if you look actually at your vendors, if you know with who you are doing business, what is actually their mission, vision, even their reporting, what is important for them, that is a very different part. And I think as well, it is very critical that companies report consistently and transparently on environmental and social risks. Hence why the G in the ESG is so important, because it actually depends everything on the governance inside. What Sam already mentioned is all the internal governance that is crucial actually for this whole matter. Now, the World Economic Forum has highlighted how reporting and disclosure of ESG performances are making a significant difference to the organizations. And there are 4 main differences and transformations that we can see. One is the organizational, the other one is the cultural, and then we have the digital transformation and the brand transformation. Now, what does it mean? So just quite quickly, the organizational transformation is really where the ESG disclosures are changing how companies identify internal gaps. So for example, Schneider Electric has been issuing disclosures on sustainability for more than a decade, adopting new solutions, identifying internal gaps, and addressing sustainability as a strategic issue. And when they started reporting it, it actually resulted in Schneider's new approach to biodiversity and prompting the company to adapt its reporting and set specific biodiversity action plans for all sites. And you have many examples like this. This is not like rocket science, and it's definitely not a few examples. You have many more. Another one is the cultural transformation, where ESG disclosures are changing how teams collaborate. And that's again something what Angus and Sam already have mentioned. It's crucial, ESG, as it is already in the name, environmental social governance. It is actually a part reflection of your whole organization, of all the teams. It's crucial that they're gonna collaborate with each other. Like many other large public companies that have been reporting on sustainability for years. For example, Bank of America had a network of internal individuals already focused on ESG reporting. And we can see that more and more companies are focused on the ESG reporting for obvious reasons. However, in Bank of America, what happened is they have strengthened their discipline around ESG reporting information and established processes and controls that actually in time, it will reach the same let's say, responsibility and expectation as the financial reporting. And what can you take out of this one is that as ESG touches almost every part of a business, facilitating collaboration between teams is essential to success in ESG reporting. Hence why there are so many questions on if it should be actually a more decentralized management style, if actually any DAO should be introduced into the companies to have actually more votes being heard in the company itself and not actually only from the top to bottom down. Now, then we have the digital transformation, which is helping companies to leverage data. And don't underestimate ESG data, because it's so much more than only the ESG data. It tells you everything about your customers. It tells you everything about your clients. It tells you everything, which direction you are heading. It can actually predict so many more steps where we are heading economically, geopolitically, and so on and so on. So leveraging technology to measure and report concrete and reliable ESG data helps companies establish transparency, trust, and here we go, accountability in their sustainability goals, in reinforcing their appeal and to key stakeholders such as investors, board members, and so on. And last but not least, we are talking about the brand transformation, which obviously is actually a natural one. Some people therefore maybe mistake ESG as the extension arm of CSR, but please, literally, there are two different things, and it's crucial to remember that as well and to understand it. Because ESG disclosures are changing how companies build their narratives around their commitments. Because the more they are committed, the more actually they will live and breathe in all their actions and how they do the business. So we all know ESG is becoming a buzzword. Everyone is throwing it. We have a whole soup of ABCs, acronyms, as you mentioned, Kieran, in the very beginning as well. But it will be more important for companies to demonstrate how their actions are reinforcing their stated values, how they focus on diverse SDGs, which ones are important to them, and to make their commitment, which results in a higher employee engagement level. So if you see, the whole loop is closing here as well. Accountability boosts collaboration, which gives actually in return more growth and more profit. Thank you.
Thank you. That was thank you so much for that summary. I think I've learned a lot about reporting from that snippet, and I know it is such a complex area. And really, what are the apart from the acronym soup, which I'm now going to use whenever I talk about ESG, I'm taking that to let you now. But one of the interesting aspects I found in there was talking about that, I guess, the data-driven and the metrics-driven aspect of this, and I guess the role of SDGs in the reporting framework. So, Sam, I might pass it over to you now to have it to I guess tease this out a bit more in terms of the I guess the role of the SDGs a bit further in terms of reporting, and then that linkage with the Science-Based Targets Initiative. So what are the linkages between those two, and do you see the continued relevance of the SDGs if there is this continued shift towards alignment to the Science-Based Targets Initiative?
Yeah, so let's work backwards a little bit from where the discussion's gone, and then we can begin to see how ESG begins to work together. The different elements all come together into one piece, which is why I see it as an essential management tool as much as about sustainability. It's about business transformation. And I suppose if we come back from the data end of things and work back, so what data do we want to manage? How do we get to that point of knowing what we're counting? So SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, there are 17 of them set by the United Nations in 2015. Companies or organizations go through a process called materiality assessment, which is to decide which elements of their business are most important to them. So they might go and talk to shareholders, talk to their employees, talk to their customers, and go through this process of determining the most important areas to focus on. So they may choose 3 to 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and decide that those are the ones they want to focus on. But under each sustainable development goal, those are broken down into different targets, which they may choose to focus on. So under health, you may choose to focus on mental health, for example. And then once you've done that, that journey then goes on into perhaps climate action might be one you choose on. Then of course you typically would set a net zero target for 2025 or 2030. And of course, if you're setting your target for 2030 back in 2015, 15 years off, it's easy to say, yep, we're going to be net zero by 2030, knowing full well that you may not be around to actually have to implement that. And then somebody gets to 2027 and realizes, hey, we've made that commitment. Now we've got to do something very quickly. So that's where Science-Based Targets Initiative comes in. It forces companies to go through a process of breaking down their net zero target. What is the step plan to achieve that? How are we going to reduce our energy consumption? How are we going to divert waste from landfill and recycle more? And go through that whole process. We're going to eliminate fossil fuels from our operations. We're going to electrify our logistics process. For example, I talked earlier about collaboration and the inter-organized. So you may have a logistics operation where the buyer works with their logistics operator and says, we want you to move to green hydrogen operated trucks, which of course those are expensive. Okay, can we get a subsidy from somebody? Maybe we have a government that's keen to introduce hydrogen. Then you have an issue about the investment that the logistics operator has to make in hydrogen trucks. They're not cheap. So let's have a contract of 7 years instead of 3 years. So we got the payback, we got the guarantee, and that's how you begin to implement that breakdown in your net zero target, and break that down through Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is then externally validated in order to check that what you're saying you're going to do is actually doable, and you then have a benchmark to measure on, and that's what your metrics are then driven by. To achieve them. So you have a baseline with a declining line towards net zero. You can then measure your process, and that's how the metrics work. So we look at installing software in buildings or portfolio of buildings that will enable building owners to not only measure their net zero progress, but also it works in other certifications as well. So they may be able to upgrade their green building sustainability rating. The highest Australian green building certification now means fossil fuel free buildings. Have we done that? Yes, we have. We've got the data to prove it. It's been externally validated. So yes, we can upgrade our green building certification from 5-star to 6-star. And guess what? We expect to be able to increase rents because our tenants all want to be net zero as well. We're helping them, they're helping us. And we're all achieving a more sustainable future together, and that's how we come back to the whole green lease item I talked about earlier.
And maybe Angus, if you've got any additional elements you might want to link in there in terms of the how organisations can reliably demonstrate, not just measure, but also demonstrate that they are decarbonising effectively, and maybe a regulator's expectations on providing assurance, is that changing in any way?
Yes, thanks for the questions, and thanks Sam for elaborating the decarbonization journey. Definitely the decarbonizations, whatever net zero, carbon neutrality is a very hot topic, and we understand that setting a decarbonization target is depending on a number of different factors, common resources and budget planning. But there's a standard to govern whether the targets, the decarbonization targets, are really science-based. And I think most of us have already heard the Science-Based Target Initiative, SBTI. Yes, it is the most recognized global organizations on setting and validating the decarbonization targets. And SBTi gives its seal of approval to companies' climate plan if the companies are making a fair contributions to the global emission cuts. And that's why we always hear the 1.5 2 degrees Celsius scenarios, things like that. And just some quick information about the SBTi. We can see that in this year, there are over 4,000 companies taking actions and 1,500 made net zero commitments. While last year, there are around 2,000 only. So we can see the big jump on this. And a very important point is that there's 2 stages for the commitment. The first one is the commitment, and the second one is the targets being validated. How to design it and what are the difference? And for many of the outsiders, they may not really know what's the difference, but in fact, it's a totally 2 different world, I can say. Just a very simple metaphor is that when you do the commitment, you sign, the company sign the commitment letter, it's like handling 5 data points. But while you do the validation and the targets are validated, it's 100 data points. Yeah, it's huge difference. And I just a quick review for the validation process. And initially, there's an initial screening to determine if all necessary information is provided. And then the SBTi will assign a validation team to do a test review to assess the targets against the SBTi criteria. It will cover lots of different questions, for example, the boundary, the calculation method, and life cycle assessment. Like we know that many listed companies, there are many subsidiaries. So what's the boundaries? Whether cover all the subsidiaries, why not, or some of them are excluded. So, and also from my experience, I heard that when really do the validation, SBTi may give you a quite short period of time to answer several questions. But anyway, so if the company really would like to demonstrate their real decarbonization efforts and SBTi, they are better to well prepare before making both the commitments and submit the target validations. Okay.
Being well prepared is certainly incredibly important in an environment like this, where it's really just it's so difficult to predict what is going to happen. But I guess the most predictable thing that will happen is that there is going to be uncertainty. That is predictable, and that there is going to be change, and the future it's certain that the future is going to change. So I guess we've got about 8 minutes left before we move over to answering questions from the floor. And I will just remind everyone, please do put questions in if you do have any questions for the panelists today. So next 8 minutes or so, I really just want to talk about the future. What does the future hold? And, you know, for each of you in the crystal ball that you've got below the camera today, you know, pulling it up and seeing what we see for the next 8 minutes or so. So Patricia, I might hand it over to you first. What does the future of ESG look like through that talent lens? And I think you've talked a bit about this already in terms of that evolution in talent management, but what does the future hold, and how do you expect roles in ESG to evolve heading into the next couple of years?
Yes, that's a very good question, Kieran. So basically, it's equally diverse and dynamic as the whole definition of ESG is becoming in every market in the world. So that's actually the best answer right now to give it to it. However, what we have seen already in our business as well, there is a huge increased demand on ESG professionals. We can see that more and more ESG professionals are screened. They want to actually, the companies want to know that they get the right talents. So as well, our job is actually to really screen them, have actually reference, get actually third parties on it through different channels, understand as well what their implementation is when they come to a company, what kind of value they are adding to it. As well, in terms of, we touched already based on it, in terms of ESG reporting, there is a huge increased amount of in the demand of professionals who are actually specialized in ESG reporting. And the irony in the whole part is that ESG reporting is quite new. So not everyone is really very well actually experienced. They don't know what to look at it. And the worst part is that actually from the corporate side or from an organizational side, the people don't know what to ask for. So there is actually them getting a gap where we are like, okay, so what do we need? Who is actually telling us what to do? Okay, good. We have the outside institutions, be it in the stock exchange or the regulators or whoever who is actually dictating the pace. However, somebody has to execute it within a company. And now the big question is, who is doing it? Which gets actually to the next step, that therefore it's so important to have actually, and I can't emphasize this enough, that we have actually commitment and collaboration between the departments. So for example, we can see two things right now in the talent, ESG talent area. Obviously, Australia was an earlier adopter than Asia, interestingly enough. However, they face, for instance, the same challenges in regards to talent. So the two things that we see is the talent deficit. And we see as well, interestingly enough, we see as well the demands and the demand of the candidates basically to see and do their due diligence on the companies and organizations themselves. Because interestingly enough, all the ESG professionals that we are placing, all of them, the first question is the company organization really committed to their ESG performances? Where they are standing, what are they going to do? So actually it becomes a completely different interview process here. It is very interesting because it's purely a scrutinization of the company that is committed to the ESG itself. We've seen recently where we had actually somebody from Canada that had to be placed in Sydney, for instance, for the ESG parts, because be it the financial sector, the services, professional services, or any kind of sectors, everyone has to think outside of the box. So it's very interesting to see how the candidates are getting more savvy. And I'm talking about ESG professionals, executives, but as well, don't forget about the different generations. So the Gen Zs already by itself have a very different approach to the future of work. Hence what Agnes said as well, why it is so important to look actually on different components in the well-being, in the happiness, in the understanding agility in the management and so on, to understand, okay, do we have actually a certain collaboration with each other? So I can go on and on because this is actually my favorite topic, but I'm aware of the time, so I will stop here.
No, good. Perhaps a topic for a future full webinar in terms of looking at that in more detail. One of the challenging parts in that is really that talent deficit, and if there's that deficit in roles but there's going to be an increase in responsibilities. That's what makes it so challenging. And seeing the expectation that there will be increased expectations on those roles and on the compliance function that we have talked about. And last question to Sam, in terms of that future trajectory for regulatory change as well. Are there any signs of regulators moving towards increased enforcement of ESG, specifically in that legislative and regulatory space? And what similarities and differences are you seeing across industries and countries in that sense?
Let me start by saying the regulatory framework is rather complex. You have a multitude of things going on at national level, city level, stock exchange listing rules. You have industry associations, industries coming together to create new net zero associations and so on. So we have the Net Zero Banking Alliance, for example. So many industries are taking their own action. So there's a real matrix of regulation at the national level. In Asia Pacific, I can say we're generally somewhat behind Europe. Europe, I would say, is ahead of the US. In the US, you have the federal and the state level regulations. It's quite similar in China as well. You have provincial level and city level regulations, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. The national commitments are being made. COP27, Patricia mentioned earlier. sets the framework for that, and that generally filters down. But we also see a bottom-up approach, as I've already mentioned. Changes also happen in line with changing government. So the change in government in Australia, for example, will inevitably lead to a changing emphasis on sustainability in Australia. But you know what? Australian businesses have already started to take an action ahead of national legislation or even state level legislation. So things are already happening. So that's the framework. There's lots of things going on in different directions. I spend a lot of my time educating our workforce. All our client-facing staff have to be able to speak to their clients about sustainability. They have to understand when they have a client that's set a net zero target for 2030, exactly what that means. And 2030 is getting closer and closer, dare I say, obviously with every passing day. So there's not much time left. And governments have also set those targets. So the legislation is going to get more and more intense, probably from 2025, which sort of brings me back to my initial topic about green leases and inter-organizational environmental governance and collaboration. There will be regulations that require green terms to be inserted into lease contracts, for example, at some point, either an appendix or as part of the binding terms. So these things will all come from 2025, and I think that's really the way forward. You don't solve your Scope 3 emissions without working with other people. So there'll be a big regulatory push to do that. There will probably be a new framework to validate it and make sure people are actually doing what they've been meant to do. So there's going to be more of the same, more intense. Every country is on a slightly different journey. Every industry is on a slightly different journey. And that is both the beauty of ESG and the complexity. So I try and stick to what I know, which is real estate and sustainability. But there's many different things that we can all learn from different industries. I looked at fisheries once as a case study. The shipping industry is a great case study as well. They've done lots of work. Fisheries is probably a lot more to be done. But shipping is a good industry case study for what can be done within an industry without having to have a lot of legislation in place.
Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you for really capping off the discussion there with that line of that's the beauty and the complexity of ESG. And I'd like to round out the formal part of the discussion with that final line, really, to leave that with the audience. So this is now the time for the Q&A part. So please do put questions in if you haven't already. We are starting to see questions come through. The first one, I think, Patricia, is directed specifically at you in terms of your background. How can we build effective ESG strategy that contributes to business growth?
So that's the interesting part, because ESG strategy has so many components, and it really, for one to actually answer this question, we need to understand a little bit more about the industry, about the business, where they are heading. Is it a listed company? Is it not a listed company? Is it a small medium enterprise? Is it an NGO? What is it, an association? What are we looking at? So literally there are so many components that we have to look at, as well as the commitment from the potentially board members, founders, entrepreneurs. So again, as well, the same for the industry. So I would definitely need to have a little bit more information. However, what I would say is, if you have, from my expertise running the social entrepreneurship organization here in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and in San Francisco, from all the people, what I've seen and I've interacted with, I could see actually the most important part is to really, if you want to start small, you can start actually already with defining some of the SDGs, some of the sustainable development goals. Which ones are for you important? Where do you stand for? There are some platforms that are helping you actually to commit and make a pledge, for instance, and to see, okay, this is what I really want to do. This is where I'm going, and this is why I'm committed to. But walk your talk. That's actually the most important part when you want to grow your business in ESG.
Can I just jump in there and follow up on that? Because I think that's a really good question. I would add to that is alignment of sustainability and business objectives is a great way to set a direction. It doesn't always work, but if you're educating your workforce, for example, you're meeting a sustainable development goal and you're getting the benefit of their of talent retention, for example. If you're reducing energy, you're saving costs. So that's the way to build an aligned strategy that meets environmental and business objectives. So I interviewed a shrimp farmer in India once as part of my master's course, and he said to me, Sam, it's without economic sustainability, there's no environmental sustainability, and he was really bang on the money there. There has to be this kind of alignment. It's not just we're going green, therefore it's going to cost us a lot of money. We're going green, and we're going to improve our business in many different ways.
Yes,
So
I feel fond. Yeah, thanks. I feel fond would like to jump on, and thanks Patricia and Sam comment. But the ESG strategy, I think, is that because as we know that ESG seems there's many different types of stakeholders, whatever, customer, tenant, investor, so on. And we understand that ESG is changing every day. And so from my experience that it's really better to define your priority, the company priority first. For example, if your first priority is the investor, then you are better to manage all the ESG ratings or the disclosures and the investor engagement. But at the same time, but your focus is your neither retail customer or the tenants. So you are better to shift on this. So how to define the material priority and keep it at least for a short period of time. We understand that the world is keep on changing, but at least if you keep it for at least several months or up to a year, then you can drive the impact. Otherwise, we have faced that some company, today I have the priority for the investor, and next month I have the priority for the tenant, then it's really not easy to drive the real impact. Yeah.
Hey, we might be able to squeeze in just one more question. We hopefully we give everyone the opportunity to share. So another question that's come through is ESG, well, comment and question. ESG is heavily dependent on the tone from the top. How can senior managers demonstrate the operational financial benefits of transition to SLTs to ensure early transition rather than waiting for mandatory regulatory pressure? Anyone want to jump in on this one?
I think we've covered bits and pieces of this already. The tone does come from the top, but we also work on empowering our staff to take initiatives. For example, our recycling initiatives in our office are run by the staff. So let's not forget the next generation. I have a few grey hairs, but there's a lot of people in my office that don't. They are as invested in the future and sustainability as much as anybody else. So they deliver on many of the actions that we have to take. We also help our clients model the steps that they're taking. So you can invest in replacing your air conditioning system. You might do a deep retrofit of your building. What are the economic benefits for you as a building owner, as a landlord in the future by doing so? Okay, so you may achieve operational efficiency, reducing electricity consumption by X%. You may enhance your green credentials of your building, and therefore you can possibly get a price premium. So one of the case studies I use in my introductions is sustainable wine in New Zealand, where they have an industry association that's gone through this process, and they achieve an average price premium of 5% on their sustainable wine compared to the non-sustainable wine produced in that area of New Zealand. So that's a like-for-like comparison. And we generally see 5 to 10% for a premium in green buildings as well. So that's how we try and demonstrate the case.
And one thing that I just wanted to add on, and this is absolutely super valuable as well, Sam, what you have said and mentioned, just to zoom out, because I think that everyone that is so passionate about ESG advocacy forgets as well what is really the main why behind it. Why do we all do it actually? Of course, what Angus said in terms of priorities in your business, it's important to align with your priorities. However, what is the why? Why? How does it help us to, for instance, reduce the carbon emission? Why do we actually put in so many efforts in waste management, in actually all the complying with all the regulations? Why? Because we want to have a better future for our next generation. And this is actually, I think, the most important part, where we really have to zoom out and understand why it is happening, and not only the theoretical part and executing because of a checkbook or checklists. That's the only thing I wanted to add. I know it's 12. Thank you.
No, and thank you so much for that, Patricia. That's a great wrap-up point. Angus, maybe if you can add just maybe a quick sentence, just to, I know people probably do want to get into I think it's nearly their lunch break.
Yes, definitely. I think organization and company need to really understand what's the standard and framework they are using and why they use this and not that. Yeah, so that's a quick wrap up for this. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, that is all we have time for. But thank you everyone for your attention, and a massive thank you to our esteemed speakers for their insights in what has been an illuminating and robust discussion. And we've covered a lot of ground today. As mentioned at the start, any of the unanswered questions, and there are a couple, we will endeavour to provide a follow-up post-session. And if you do have any questions that you didn't get to ask either, please do reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much again. Enjoy the rest of your year as we head into the holiday season, and take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.